All right. So, thanks a lot, man, for coming on. I've spoken quite a while back about having a discussion, and I've just things have been getting in the way. But I really appreciate you coming on. And yeah,
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, man. I've been pretty busy myself. I know life's going on. We all got stuff to do. So, hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about this. And there's not too many people that even entertain this idea, and it's a neglected view. So it's a pleasure to have somebody who's willing to just show their face and get out there and talk about it.
yeah, man. All right. Well, I guess let's get right to it. I guess the first question would be, how would you define idealism?
Okay, well, if I've got this right off the top of my head, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines it as something mental is fundamental to reality
Mm-hmm.
or even exhaustive of reality. And there's a
Mm.
bit of a distinction you could make there because notice how I call myself monistic idealism.
Right.
You could call yourself a dualistic idealist. So as long as you hold the mental as fundamental,
Mm-hmm.
as long as that's the ground of being, spirit, you know, mind, and something non-physical like that, then that's what idealism is. You believe that is what grounds existence.
Right. And so then from there, what would be the distinction as far as you understand it between the monistic and the dualistic?
Okay, so the full definition earlier was that it is fundamental, the mental is fundamental, but exhaustive of
Mm-hmm.
reality. So the
Right.
monistic idealist holds that the mental is completely exhaustive, that all of existence is purely mental. And the dualistic version holds that it is not exhaustive, that there is a mental and a non mental reality, whatever they call that, physical or something else.
Hmm. Do you know how that would be distinguished from just pure dualism, like an idealism that holds that there is a dualism versus just a pure dualism, or is that effectively the same thing?
Right, that's a good question. So, for instance, when you listen to people, Christian apologists like William Lane Craig, he holds that there is a immaterial, all-powerful mind, right, that
Mm-hmm.
is fundamental, and that the physical world is created. I call that idealism
Mm-hmm.
still because the physical world is emergent. It is not fundamental. So,
Right.
if a substance dualist did hold that there is both mental and physical as fundamental, they are
Mm-hmm.
foundational, then I would say that is a very pure substance dualism. But I very rarely encounter that. Usually there's Christians or some kind of theist who holds that the physical is emergent.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So then, looking into like the monistic view, would that mean that as opposed to the physical realm being emergent, that it's illusory? Would that be the distinction between
Oh,
those
yeah,
two ultimately?
that's another good question there. Yeah, there's a distinction you could make between reductionism and eliminativism. To
Okay.
eliminate would be to say that yes, it's an illusion; it doesn't actually exist, and that would be a another pure version of idealism. But a reductionist view may say that well, it is weakly emergent
Hmm.
or strongly emergent, and there's another important distinction to make there. If you want me to delve into that,
Yeah, please.
okay. So um, weak reductionism. Imagine, when you build a face made of Legos, you have the little bricks and you put them all together. And
Hmm.
then after this complex combination, you eventually have a face. But it's nothing more than the Lego bricks. You can
Right.
reduce it to that. So, a more strongly emergent idea, though this isn't a pure example here, imagine steam coming from an engine.
Hmm.
Okay, you have the engine, and then you have steam, which is not the engine, right?
Yes.
So coming out of it, and so you have something different. So the strong emergence would be this idea that yeah, the physical world does emerge from the mental,
Hmm.
but it's not reducible to the mental. So they would say it's not the mental is not exhaustive here, but the
Hmm.
mental is fundamental. The physical strongly emerges from the mental, and then the weak emergent view would be something like mine, that it's just more mental, kind of like Lego bricks coming together. It's just more of the same thing.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, well, my next question would just be to ask you like what sort of whether you have a specific pathway that sort of led you to this worldview, or whether, yeah, effectively that question.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
how you came to this.
I started as a substance dualist, so I've always kind of held that the mental is irreducible and all that. The
Mm,
interaction problem, was just
yeah,
insurmountable at this point.
yeah.
And then I encountered the introspective argument, which I don't know if you've heard that, but the quick rundown is, the mind does exist,
Hmm.
the mind is irreducible, but substance dualism is false. So if there's only one substance and we know that the mind exists and it can't be reduced, well then that substance must be the mental.
Yeah,
We can't eliminate the mind, it's contradictory.
exactly. Yeah.
So to stick with a physicalist view, to me, just leads to or a denial of the existence of mind, and so it's just unstable. I have to be an idealist.
Well, what do you think of the argument that the mind is real but emergent from the physical?
Right. They would have to either hold that the mind is strongly emergent
Hmm.
or weakly emergent. And so the weak emergent view would have to hold that the mind is reducible. And that's the second premise of the introspective argument. And I'm going to have to argue that the hard problem of consciousness is just it's an insurmountable challenge for them that they're not going to be able to get over. And I can give a more formal argument if you want, but there's another empirical point you can make here, that if the mind were emergent in a weak sense, if it really was just reducible to the brain and its configurations, well, then once you have identified what it is like, once you've identified those neural patterns, that should identify what it is like to be the subject.
Right.
And Daniel Dennett goes over this as well. Are you familiar with him?
I'm familiar with him, but not well. Like I know
Oh,
who he is.
okay, yeah.
But,
He denies the existence of the mind.
right.
He's an eliminativist, and
Yeah.
he gets there through his empirical observations. He looks at the brain. He realizes, hey, I don't see what it is like just by looking at your brain and your body.
Right.
So he then says, well, it's not there, right?
Right.
And I say that doesn't mean the mind doesn't exist. That's
Right.
just a failure of reductionism.
Yeah. Def-
So so I think that's a powerful refuter of the weakly emergent view, that it can't be the case that the mind is weakly emergent.
mhm.
So the strong emergence view, how I refute that is to note I could attack the concept of strong emergence itself, but I think even better is to note how this just leads back to the mind-body problem all over again. If you have
Mhm.
a physical
Yeah.
world and a non-physical, emergent mental world, how do they interact? How is this happening? So you're right back to the same problems as Descartes,
Yeah.
plus the problems of strong emergence.
Yeah. I like that. Do you think? I just thought of this. Do you think that the strong emergent theory could be associated with panpsychism?
Yeah, it's panpsychists usually would resist strong emergence. They see the idea of, for instance, the mind being strongly emergent as ridiculous. So they say we should hold the mind as fundamental, that it's everywhere, and that the physical world maybe is fundamental alongside it, but they're all
Hmm.
still one somehow. I still see panpsychism as kind of a weird, kind of a not so coherent view in many ways, but
Yeah. I haven't delved too deeply, but I found it didn't seem very convincing. It seemed like to me, maybe this is slightly different from what you were saying, that they were just saying that mind is a property of matter, something like that.
yeah, that's right. They'll say, yeah, that matter has mind, that everything has a mind, that it's just a property of it. And so they'll say that it's irreducible as well, just not emergent. And,
Yeah.
you know, um, the real main challenge for panpsychism is the combination problem. How do these micro minds combine together to make, large macro minds like ourselves?
Yeah.
You know, how do these parts come together to form a whole? And it's just, it sounds like the hard problem of consciousness, just sort of in a new way, just sort of tweaked a little bit. You still have this idea of, well, how do you get from this bottom up kind of process? And I think as Christians or theists in general who are more monistic, we have the advantage of avoiding that problem altogether.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it seems simpler to, at least I'm not to put words in your mouth, but to see these things as sort of reflections of mind, as opposed to um, like things that they can be unified if the thing that's sort of bringing them into being is already like one. It's already unified.
Right. Yeah, that is a very good way to put it. Yeah, it's a very succinct way to note that it's just, if you have a seamless one, if you
Hmm.
avoid duality, you have a much, much simpler ontology. It's a lot less trouble.
Yeah. So all right. So here's the next question, I guess. Then is if so you would hold that you're a monistic idealist. So you believe in the sort of the what was it? The not strong emergent, the weak emergent idea of like matter being weakly emergent. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question exactly?
So you like as monistic idealist, you consider reality to like the physical world to be weakly emergent.
Yes, you're exactly. That's
Okay.
correct.
So do you have do you have any sort of idea of how that might occur? Yeah,
Okay.
you know what I mean? Like
Yes,
it's
that's a
kind of a hard question to even frame, but
no. That you phrased it perfectly. I totally understand what you're saying. Right? It's, you know, how does creation occur? Right? Because I do believe in my form of idealism that, you know, God does exist.
yeah,
That, you know, essentially this one single mind is the creator of the physical world.
yeah,
But how does that happen? Right? That is
right.
a very interesting question. So
And maybe after that, why? But
yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, well, we can delve into that as well. I don't know exactly the details on some of this, but I do believe there is insight in dreams.
Hmm.
Okay, because there's some scientific research that I've delved into a bit about how dream characters, people that we observe in our dreams,
Yeah.
may actually be conscious, or may possess some form of mental abilities, some
Hmm.
cognitive functions. And so this can be explained in all sorts of different ways, but I do suspect that somehow this idea that there is a whole world that we can experience purely within our own mind, right? An entire world that you can smell and touch and feel, and is even populated by other minds that
Hmm.
are, you know, that you are fundamental to. Somehow, I think if we study dreams a bit more and the ontology of them, I think that will give us insight into how we get this, you know, emergent world from where there's your mind and then there's a world of experience. So how that works, to be honest, I don't know the details, but I do see a path to how we
Yeah.
can get an answer to that question.
Okay. So that made me wonder. This is sort of along the same lines. If all is one mind, then how are we distinct?
So a good distinction to make here are the different kinds of monism. So you could say there's priority monism and
Hmm.
existence monism.
Okay.
Priority monism holds that there is a whole, an irreducible whole, and that there are parts. It's just the whole is prior. So
Hmm.
imagine like maybe an orange, right? That's just all there, and then it, you know, divides into slices,
Yeah.
right? First you have the whole, and then there's the aspects, the parts that come from it. And the existence monist says there are no parts. There is only the whole.
Hmm.
There's just one entity or one thing that is concrete. So
Yeah.
I would be more of a priority monist. I
Yeah.
think that there is fundamentally one mind, right? But
Yeah.
we are partial aspects of that mind. We
Yeah.
are, you know, sort of like dream characters. I would go back to that example, that we are little minds within a bigger mind, but we are ultimately, as Bernardo Kastrup would say, these sort of dissociated alters.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's actually, when I made that video that you commented on, this gets to specifically or close to the point that I was trying to make, is if things are, if we are in a what was it, priority
monism.
monism, if that's the case, then what is it that enables distinctions? See what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if all is one thing in you know, its basis, its sort of ontological basis is oneness, then how do we get to multiplicity? How do we even, like, how do we achieve, you know, so to speak, alters? Or like, how do these distinctions and divisions take place? Like, what is causing that, if not some kind of a something that's almost like I feel like I collapse into a sort of dualism when I think about this, to a degree. I think there's a solution, but which I was trying to sort of state in that video, but it seems like at a certain point there's something outside of mind that creates that distinction and enables it to divide in some way. See what I mean?
Absolutely, yes. You have diagnosed what I see as, for a priority monist, the main problem for the idealist to tackle, I believe. And I'm glad you've identified this, because I hear a lot of objections to idealism that people give, and they're so easy to answer. But this one, I'm going to admit, this is like the interaction problem for idealism,
Yeah.
right? In a way, like, this is our big problem.
Yeah.
So I want to start answering that by first sort of going over panpsychism again real quick. So the combination problem was, remember, how do you get these little minds to come together to form one large mind? So the idealist, in a way, or even the cosmopsychist, will dodge this problem altogether by saying, well, instead of a bottom up, we're going to have a top down. We're going to have one whole mind at the top, and these other minds sort of decombine rather than combine.
You begin, you don't begin with like pure multiplicity. You begin with pure unity, right?
Yes, yeah. And so
I'm just reiterating. Go ahead. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, yeah, you're right. And so this leads to now, of course, this question that you brought up. Well, then, how do you get to this multiplicity? Now, I do want to note that one way to avoid this problem is to bite the bullet and embrace existence monism. I will admit that is an option to consider and take seriously.
I feel like there's kind of an obvious problem there, though, isn't there? That sort of like trying to deny that there's a mind. There's also like trying to deny that there's multiplicity. It's like, well, I'm experiencing multiplicity, right? So it's got its own issue, basically. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah. To bite the bullet, I feel like if somebody is, has teeth, hard enough to bite that one, right, and say that, okay, well, there is no multiplicity, they would then have to say certain things like, you and I are identical. That there is no distinction between you and me. There is no distinction between even the cosmic mind and me. That everything is actually identical.
And with objects, like all of it. It's all like there's no distinction, and that seems, maybe I'm misunderstanding or something, but that seems, absurd.
Yes, no, you're absolutely justified in this prima facie response to be like, well, that's just absurd. Of course, ordinary objects are distinct from me. Of course, everything is there, and you are not me. Yeah, there does seem to very, very obviously seem to be a distinction between us, and there's not many philosophers at all that will claim this. But there are some who do make some interesting arguments, though, that I do still find somewhat interesting. The problems of mereology, that such as the ones you just brought up, right? About, well, how do you get this multiplicity? How do you get these multiple minds from this one mind, right? Like, you will encounter, problems with metaphysical vagueness, as they call, with how to make these distinctions between objects, and, how do you really, hold a parsimonious ontology You know, how do you avoid having epiphenomenal entities?
Hmm.
You know, if you're going to have these, you know, separate objects, these entities that are not reducible to each other and have their own causal powers, or they lack causal powers, and you're going to have these different domains. And it's complicated. I'm not an existence monist myself. I'm still exploring it, but
Yeah, it sounds
I,
worth. I mean, it's worth exploring for sure.
yeah, yeah, it has its own problems, as you can see. But I got to say, th- they're willing to, you know, bite some bullets. So it's
Yeah,
kind of, it's tough to,
yeah,
you know, to come at them sometimes. But yeah, it to for myself as a priority monist, I still find insight that dream characters I think are going to help us. Now, this may sound like, you know, a promissory argument that, you know, I'm not really answering the question. I'm going to admit that, yeah, I'm not really answering the question. I don't
yeah,
really know how we do get these separate, distinct minds within this one mind. But when I look at dreams and dream characters, and I look at the scientific evidence and, you know, test out certain things myself here, there seems to be, you know, minds within minds right there. How
yeah.
this happens, I don't know, but
See what
there
you're saying.
seems to be evidence that it does happen.
Hmm.
We can, you know, try to give arguments that, oh, this is impossible, but I'm going to say, well, it seems it is possible. It seems we have a real example of this happening. How this occurs, I think we need to do more research.
Okay, okay. So, next question then. I'm sort of leading towards my own idea on this because I feel like I may, I don't know. There's definitely problems with it too, but I may have a solution to this problem. Um, but I don't know. I've been questioning it lately myself. Anyway, my question would be like, what do you think? How would you define mind? Or yeah, yeah, just that question. How would you define mind?
Okay, yeah, I guess sometimes I shoot from the hips a lot. You know, I tend to kind of play a little fast and loose with my terms sometimes, so I tend to
That's fine.
use
I do the
them.
same thing.
I tend to use them interchangeably.
Mhm.
So, for instance, I tend to use words like mind to mean consciousness or something like that, which I
Right.
tend to go with the sort of Nagel Chalmers sort of way of looking at it, where it is what it is like to be you, what it is like to be the subject for the subject.
Mhm.
And so that's how I see the mind, the mental, and all that. And you could, if you want to be more specific, I think the mind is perhaps that aspect of consciousness that enables more precise, focused thought that is volitional and,
Mhm.
you know, all that.
So would you put one before the other though? Consciousness before mind?
So I guess there's a good distinction to make here that I've heard Christian idealists make, called, what is it? Self-reflexive consciousness and
Hmm.
consciousness proper. That yes, there is consciousness proper, which is purely what it is like to be the
Hmm.
subject, and this self-reflexive consciousness is knowledge of these mental states. And so I think, for instance, in this cosmic mind, it's all there. It's all one and the same. But with ourselves, I think, yeah, I think there's first a sort of consciousness that's there, and then this sort of these, you know, the mind sort of not strongly emerges, just sort of increases in strength, increases in intensity, you know, from when you're a baby to when you're older.
Right. So consciousness could be attributed maybe to like a rabbit and what it's like to be a rabbit, whereas a mind is more something that would be attributed to human thought and like rational thought, things like that. Or maybe I'm stretching too far there.
No, I think that's kind of a good way to put it. Yeah, and I think this is something I need to focus, get more precise on myself. But that's sort of how I do see it. That, you know, like, you know, I think there are beings that are conscious, like someone who has Alzheimer's, for instance, right, who is very degenerated in their mental states,
Hmm.
and you know, there's just, you know, really nothing behind the eyes. They're alive.
Yeah.
You know, there's something there, but their mind is eroded significantly, even though there is consciousness there. I wouldn't say there's no mind, but there is
Right.
clearly, like, because consciousness is there or it isn't, even though there is degrees of that in a sense. There seems to just be, you know, particular functions of the mind, you know, particular functions of that which go up and down.
Could you possibly list what you think the functions of mind are?
Okay, yeah. So, like, you know, introspection,
Hmm.
I would say is one of them. You know, other sources of knowledge. in general. Like you could say, your sense experiences, I think, is all tied to your mind. It's
Mhm.
all one. Just your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions, these are all processes that your mind engages in.
Sounds to me like you're listing sort of orientations that the mind can take to reality. Does that sound appropriate?
Oh,
Like
perhaps.
oriented inward, oriented towards a specific sense, oriented towards you know maybe those would be almost exhaustive. Probably not, but things like that.
No, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, you're just orienting your awareness
Right.
towards different things. You're orienting it towards yourself, or
Mhm.
you orient it towards others, or
So that
objects. Yeah.
I really got to read a lot more. So if I use terms sloppy in a sloppy way, correct me.
Oh,
But
you're fine. Yeah, I'm all over the place with my terms.
yeah. But it sounds like what you're describing is sort of the will, right? The ability to orient seems to me to be inextricable from the will as an aspect of the mind, maybe, or I don't know. Does that sound right? I'm spitballing right now, honestly.
No, that's fine. Yeah, we're just having a conversation here.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's actually a good point to bring up because I will have to admit I can be pretty fast and loose with my terms. So yeah, maybe a better one would maybe to focus on that one, will, in a sense there that yeah, you are willing
Hmm.
in your sense. Maybe that could be more connected to mind, right? Maybe there's a really strong relation there that maybe that's what mind ultimately is this will to think, this will to act, this will to focus or not focus and all that.
Hmm.
Oh, so I'm
Like,
curious. What did
but
you think? What was your solution again, or your thoughts on the decombination problem, on how you get the many from the one?
well, I was kind of going to lead to that, but first we need kind of a working agreement on what the mind is, and that's kind of where my problem is. So I was trying to play with that for a minute before we got.
Okay, good point.
Uh,
Yeah, you're right. We do need to get some certain terms nailed down if you want to make that argument. I see.
yeah, I so I'll sort of shorthand it. I like I said, my biggest issue with this right now is trying to pin down what the mind is, if it is the primitive, whether it's just consciousness, like a rabbit is conscious, in its most like primitive sense, whether it's just like this sort of what we would think of as vague awareness, you know, or whether it's something that's kind of like totally like to one extreme or the other, like almost imperceptible in its primitive form, or whether it's like all of the above. Like I think you were insinuating where it's got like the will and intention and attention and concept, things like that, whether those are all sort of just fully present in that first primitive point, you know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, whether because like for instance, like Bernardo Kastrup will hold that the cosmic mind is not aware of itself, I believe, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken, that this
Right.
mind does not know that it's conscious.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting to. I'm glad you said that. Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Yeah. So for
Which,
me, I believe it's all there. I disagree with him on that.
yeah, I think my intuition is that you are correct, and that it's all there at once. Uh, because even if it, in some sense, if we're thinking of like that which is outside of time and space, which I mean, I'm assuming you are, right? We're speaking of something outside of time and space, right? When we speak
It's
of
more
mind.
like it's more like I would reduce space and time to the mental. That
Yes.
space and time is nothing more than the mental.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Basically, even if in one sense at the primitive it is merely conscious, it's sort of since it encompasses, let's say, or like, yeah, since it sort of encompasses and in a sense is outside of time and space because it's sort of the origin and the end of it, ultimately it has to sort of simultaneously have all properties of itself.
That makes perfect sense to me, yeah.
Okay, I'm glad. I wasn't sure if that sounded like nonsense, but good. I'm glad you see what I'm saying. So, okay, so we've got this sort of idea of mind. So this is basically how my argument goes, is mind is basically almost synonymous with concept. It's like it is where concept exists. And I think that that's sort of what mind's first function is to conceive, right? And that even has like a birthing, creative sort of energy to that word, which I really like. So you've got concept. And I think that if we were to think of like, all right, so we've got this thing and it's the first thing, you know? And so in a sense, it's like, since time and space are products of it, it exists sort of outside of the effects of those in one sense. Like it exists outside of, it's not limited by them, right?
Right, that makes sense.
If that's the case, then there was, I'm going to use language that is inaccurate, but maybe like it's a way of pointing towards something that's difficult to point to. There was a time when nothing existed, right? And yet, if this is the primitive, then this thing existed. So there was only one thing. That was a bad way of saying it. Basically, there was a time when there was only one thing, and
right,
it was mind. And in a sense, that still is the case if this is true, that there's only one thing exists, and that's mind, right? But at the same time, when you're thinking about it in this sort of temporal way that humans kind of have to think about things, you have to say like, oh, okay, well, you got the first thing, and this is the only thing. If this thing is a mind, then it's a thing that has concepts. If it's a thing that has concepts, and a concept is sort of a kind of an experience. I'm kind of equivocating a lot of stuff, it's sloppy, but if a concept is a kind of experience, and it, like, where is it, basically, is the question. It's sort of like, where can you place this thing? And where does it place itself? What does it experience? And I would say that experience is nothing. And that since it is a thing that conceives of things and conceives of experiences in that way, that its first concept, basically, the first thing that it created, so to speak, was nothing as a concept. See what I mean?
I think I do see what you mean. Maybe I can ask you this to see if I'm understanding you correctly. Mm-hmm. So you know how music, for instance, what defines music is not necessarily the sounds somebody makes, but you know, the space in between those notes, that emptiness, that nothingness that is not there, right? And when you think of space in general, right, the distance between you and me, we call that space, that thing that is between you and I. In a way, we sort of reify that and say that, oh, there is nothing there, or there is just this gap between us. And so, yeah, is that kind of what you're getting at in a way?
Yeah, like the space between the notes becomes something because of the notes, in a sense. Good. And I think that nothing becomes, and always, I guess, always has been something, because there was always someone, if we want to personify this, which I would ultimately personify mind. There was someone to experience nothing. And so nothing was something. It was the absence, it was the opposite, or the absence of the self that was experiencing it, right? which is why I think there's something to like the Buddhist Hindu thing where there's this emptiness, where it's like, in a sense, there is nothing. But who said that? Right?
You see, now that's a way to that's a really good way to sort of one up the existence monist. You know, the existence monist is like, oh man, check it out, I got the most parsimonious, or ontology, and there's only one concrete entity. And then this was like, what concrete entity? What are you talking about? It's like, there is no anything. There's just nothingness. Would that be? Would this be like an anti-realism, like a very strict kind of metaphysical or anti-realism?
No, I believe in matter.
Oh, okay. So you believe something exists?
Absolutely. I believe that mind exists, because mind is what defines nothing as nothing. Or mind is what experiences nothing. Like, if there's the experience of nothing, something's experiencing it. Someone's experiencing it. And so I think that sort of proves mind. If nothing exists, then there's mind to experience it, in a sense. Which is why, like, I even think, you know, how some people, they'll take, like, high-dose psychedelics and they'll say, like, you know, I cease to exist. And it's like, right, you had the experience of nothing, but you had that. You know, like, there was, even if it's, like, impossible to describe because it was, like, the furthest zoom out that you can have, right? Still, the furthest zoom out to the point at which nothing exists, like, you're zoomed out.
Yeah, it's like Nagel's The View from Nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, usually we're looking at things from a particular perspective, you know, and then we're like, oh, well, what is it like to view from that perspective? But perhaps there's this, as you said, you know, maybe space and time is not fundamental, right? So you're not having you're not having a perspective within space and time. You're not. It's this view outside of space and time, in a way, is what you're getting at, right? That there's this view of nothing. That there's a perspective. Maybe that's just pure perspective. You know what? I think that's a great way, to affirm the first premise of the introspective argument. Yeah, instead of just this sort of prima facie, like, oh yeah, I just know my mind exists, I think before I am, in a way, you could say, well, if nothing exists, I mean, you're left with mind.
Yeah.
You are left with consciousness. Am I understanding that right?
I'm not sure that's what I was saying exactly, but I would agree with that. No, that's exactly what I was saying, actually.
Oh, okay.
No, that's right. So then the next part of that, I guess, would be to realize that realization that hypothetically or theoretically occurred outside of time, that's always been, that sort of realization that's always been, so to speak, that nothing exists, and that because nothing exists, because of the experience of nothing, that someone exists. I think that sort of it works like a mirror, right? So it's like, and there's like I really like this symbolic way of looking at it, where like a mirror is ultimately chaos, because it's like a pool of water, right? A pool of water mirrors things. A mirror, not just the object of mirror, but the phenomenon of mirroring is when you stand opposite to a, subjectively speaking, a pure chaos. And when you look into pure chaos, there's nothing there. They're basically synonymous. Chaos and nothingness are synonyms, at least the way I see it, the way I use the words. And so when you look into them, you see, basically, you see a reflection. Like, it ends up being a reflection. There's also this other way of thinking about it that goes a little bit deeper, is like, let's think of black, like the color black, like darkness. When people go into darkness, that's another form of chaos. It's like nothing. People if you put them in a dark room long enough, they start to hallucinate, which means that their mind actually starts to sort of exteriorize into that chaotic frame, right? So basically, their mind starts reflecting. They start seeing their mind projected or reflecting off of that darkness. And I think like you can step back all the way to the point at which we say, okay, well, if the first thing was nothing, then nothing acted like a mirror. It was like a negation. Like if there's nothing but a negation, then there's, I don't know, like I'm not a math or a logician or anything, so this is probably not, anybody who is would think I'm an idiot, but basically it's like somebody drew the line, you know? Like somebody drew that squiggle that negates, or like there's a way that it references something else. Like a negation references what it's negating, effectively. And I think that sort of creates this mirroring effect. It's like a feedback loop. And I think that, in a sense, creates this way for God to know himself by knowing what he is not. And what he is not is nothing, because he's everything.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's sort of the means by which the world unfolds. It's sort of an expression through nothing. And so that's where that line, that's where that distinction is allowed to begin. Is there's a creation of the absence of mind through which mind can enter. And another way to think about it, I don't know how much you're into like symbolism, but it's the masculine and the feminine, effectively. Is like you have the void or the nothing, and then you have this thing that exists, and it like moves through, and as it moves through, it's like a 0 and a 1. It's like binary code. So you got like 1, which is like this sort of mind, this being or whatever, and nothing, which is sort of this concept. It's like the first concept. And when it's mirrored, the reflection is there, and the reflection becomes something new. It's different from the thing that's being reflected, and it's different from the mirror in which it's reflected, right? It's distinct. So a third thing emerges. See what I mean? So the third thing is the reflection itself, which is distinct from what is reflected and where it's reflected.
It's all one in that sense here, because it's just that one thing being reflected. You're not adding two things together to try to get a third per se. You have the one,
right,
and then just really a reification of that one.
But I think it's still there's a way in which it's distinctly free also.
Oh, like sort of a trinity.
Yeah.
In a sense, yeah. I'm a Christian myself. So
yeah, I am.
So, yeah, I'm Orthodox with the small O, though I'm interested in the big O, Orthodox as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like Orthodox small O Roman Catholic.
So, like, the Eastern Orthodox Church?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I'm exploring a bit more as well. Particularly when it comes to idealism, how Theosis ties into all of this as well. Have you heard of Theosis?
I've heard of it, but I'm not. You can explain.
Yeah, it comes from the Greek theos, meaning God, osis, process. So it's the God process in that sense. And how the Church Fathers use that term it was this process of becoming one with God, or becoming like God, or divine,
right?
As Saint
becoming a perfect reflection.
Yeah, as Saint Athanasius said, God became man, so man can become God.
Right. I remember hearing that after I had this idea had sort of come to me, and I was like, man, yeah, like that's it, basically.
This ties into symbolism as well. I'm glad you brought that up, because the metaphysics of idealism is fascinating, and we can go on forever, and there's a lot we can delve into, but there's everyday implications as well. And I think, for instance, like, our bodies, right, are an image of our mind.
Yeah.
In a sense. And I believe that a strong mind is a strong body. And so I see the value in bodybuilding in this sense. I see the value in nutrition. And, I've noticed that, not to be insulting to people, but idealists in my experience, tend to be low in body fat. And lo and behold, look at you. You lean more towards idealism, and you are not obese. You are not overweight. You
Yeah.
know, and I think maybe that could be a sign of a parsimonious worldview in a way. You are resisting these unnecessary, impulses, these excess,
I mean,
yeah.
I got a good metabolism, but um, I do
But you
see
make
what
good
you're saying.
choices
No,
though.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying.
Right. Maybe
Like
you don't
some
eat
people
super
don't.
healthy, crazy all the
Um,
time, but you don't go to an excess, clearly. I mean,
I
it's
think that
calories in, calories out.
implicitly people might have this sort of some subconscious sense of victimization if they're pure materialists, because you ultimately have to embrace something at least close to determinism if you're a materialist. Um, and so I think, as opposed to that, if you're an idealist, you realize that if you're a victim of yourself first.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, this is true. I mean, when it comes to pharmacology, right? People who have psychiatric disorders and other stuff, we usually just want to give them a bunch of drugs, right? People think, oh, well, the mind emerges from the brain. You just
Right.
got to play with the
The body
brain.
from the brain.
Yeah, and then you can somehow fix the mind, but this can do a lot more harm than good in some ways, and
Yeah.
it's just not good in a lot of ways. So I think we have to be preventative in many ways, more or less, when it comes to things we call mental illness. We have to consider genetic factors, and we have to consider healthy life choices. I mean, this plays into things like Alzheimer's and
Yeah.
all sorts of other diseases that our mind will succumb to if we are not fit. So I think, and there's lots of other things like IQ, right? Those who are obese tend to have
Yeah.
a lower IQ, and this is an interesting phenomenon. And they've done other studies where they know, well, what causes the other? Where does the evidence lean? And it leans towards low IQ causing obesity. Like
Hmm.
it leans towards that. So, when I look at,
That's
for
interesting.
yeah, and I mean, there's other studies I can show you. I forgot her name. I can look it up in a second if you'd like. Where
Sure.
our faces, our facial symmetry and our bone structure
Yeah.
and other indicators of our physical health do in fact tell us about mental states.
Hmm.
As an idealist, we're all one, right? We're not dualists. We don't hold that, you know, that your body is just a machine that houses your soul, right? Like
Yeah.
you can see someone's mental states on their face. You can see when someone's happy or sad or hurting. We can always act and pretend, but that's a skill you acquire, right? Not
Yeah.
everyone's
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
at that, right? And the mask will slip and we will see your face and we will see all that. And so, yeah, I believe our bodies and all that is definitely crucial to know about ourselves. There's wisdom there. So I think,
Yeah.
bodybuilding, I've been stressing on that a lot more because the health benefits in general and what it means for you as a person, what it means for you as a character, right?
Yeah.
Like someone who is physically strong. And that doesn't mean big muscles, by the way. There's videos I can show you of a guy that weighs 150 and
Yeah.
benches 415.
Oh,
Okay, so it's
wow.
not necessarily size, right? It's not all about
Or-
size,
mm,
but it
yeah.
does it. It's a good indicator. And you know, if you're strong physically, right? If you can really bench that, if you can really do all that, that implies you worked hard for that. You
Oh, yeah.
trained for that. You ate right. You thought right. You
Hmm.
acted right. And that implies other things for your daily life. That means you probably work hard at your job. You probably work hard in your family
Hmm.
and in other pursuits in your life. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily true, but it's an indicator. It's a good inductive way of seeing it, I think. And so, as idealists, we should take advantage of this and
I like that.
bodybuild, get strong.
I dig that you took it down that road, man. That's a good pathway to go. I like pulling it into the practical, because I do feel like the like my system, quote unquote. I can see it. Just maybe this is even a quality of idealism as being this, maybe parsimonious might be the right word. I like the word. I'm very. It seems like everything fits together with it. It's a
Yeah,
very seamless fit, and I mean, obvious for obvious reasons, because everything's one thing, right? In a sense.
yeah,
But it really seems like it just can. seamlessly flow through the levels, down to the most pragmatic stuff, up to the most esoteric, and it's just there's a beauty to that, you know. And beauty, you know, maybe that's a sign that you're on the right track when you see that.
Absolutely, there's definitely beauty in simplicity, and that kind of common sense approach that I think, we did get really metaphysical earlier, but
Yeah,
idealism can be seen in a very common sense, very easy to talk about way. It can be made even simpler. It's such a simple ontology, and it really does have effects in everyday life. I mean, you put that responsibility on yourself. You're not just a consequence of these material compositions that you can then whine about and be like, oh, well, now we just got to change my environment because I'm a victim
yeah,
of it. No, you have the power. This is an empowering philosophy that gives you strength to then know you can pick yourself up, you can work hard, and you can get stuff done. And that's so beautiful, right? I mean, all these other philosophies want to put you down, and idealism just
yeah.
lifts you up.
I dig that, man. I definitely do. That's interesting. I've been thinking recently a little bit about the concept of personas. You know, like this sort of image that you portray of yourself in differing environments. And I feel like I don't know what you were just saying reminded me of that. How you can I don't know. The question that I had was basically like, is it just a mask, or is it that parts of yourself sort of resonate with and feel capable of extending into one environment and not into another, right? And I think there's sort of a sense in which both are true. But I was leaning towards more of like the way I was thinking about it was more of like a victimization thing, where it's like, oh well, this environment doesn't allow for like maybe certain higher parts of my nature to extend, and so lower parts begin to sort of metastasize to take the space where those other those other parts of my personality or personhood should be. Um, but I like sort of the opposite view that at the same time, like it's a feedback, but you definitely have the power to affect your environment in a way that will make it something that will allow for those better parts of yourself. You know, at the same time, you also sometimes have to change your environment, but that's another act of the will.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, this gives causal powers back to the agent. This shows, yes, there is free will. And here's another thing that comes with this, though, on the flip side, responsibility.
Yeah,
Like you are, because we have this power, this will, we can now be blamed, and nobody
yeah,
likes to be blamed. And so some people want to take idealism. Like I said earlier, it does raise us up. And someone might want to say, oh, well, it makes you feel good. Maybe
right.
you're experiencing some cognitive dissonance, and this philosophy helps you feel good. This helps you cope with reality that you can't, that, you really are a victim and it sucks and whatever. But I would say no. Accepting responsibility is that red pill, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah,
Accepting that, like the reason why, for instance, that, oh, maybe the reason why your back hurts and your joints are achy and you're depressed, maybe that's because you're not making good choices. Maybe it's because you got to eat better and you got to exercise, and maybe you need to focus more on positive things. And instead of just, oh, well, it's because the food that's available, that's cheap or whatever, blah blah blah.
yeah,
People make
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
excuses, and it's like, the arguments. I hate to bring it back to bodybuilding. It's just a good example, I think.
Good.
Uh, the arguments these people will give are just bad arguments.
Yeah,
Like I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have this or that. Oh wait, you have enough money for that burrito? You have enough time to play video games? You have enough? You
I
could.
think I
Yeah.
think often it's just a sideways way of batting away having to talk about it or having to think about it. They don't want to a lot of the time. When you hear those kind of excuses,
Yeah, and I
it,
think this delves into politics as well. I don't know if you get into that, but I'll come right out with it. And this is part of the reason why I'm not showing my face.
sure.
My political view is more of a far right political philosophy,
Are
and I
you
think
into the
this.
distributist?
The Distributist? Oh,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah. I'm a little bit familiar with their work. Not super into it, but I've heard their stuff.
Okay.
I think a more monistic idealist view does lead to a far right political philosophy. And I think this is, you know, perfectly moral and normal. And a lot of people they see it as extreme, but I think it's just a natural
Yeah.
consequence of our metaphysics, and it makes perfect
Could
sense.
you explain what you mean by far right when you say it? Because obviously there are different variations of this.
Yes, absolutely. I really like the language that was said here in this Wikipedia entry. I don't like using Wikipedia per se, but they put it a bit simpler than I do. So it says right here, the core of the far right's worldview is organicism, the idea that society functions as a complete, organized, and homogeneous living being. Okay, and so when you get into organicism a bit here, it talks about how it's a doctrine that rejects mechanism and reductionism, doctrines that claim the smallest parts by themselves explain the behavior of larger organized systems of which they are a part. And so, this rejects, vitalism and other things like that. But, this is a very monistic and a holistic doctrine. So how this
Yeah.
gets into politics is that normally people in today's liberalism hold the individual as the primary unit of society in many ways, that you have to respect the individual's rights and you have to accommodate them, even if that comes at the sake of the whole. You have
Yeah.
to, these whole transgender bathrooms and, all these, minority groups that they want to rise up and create these laws for, that, hey, you have to, accommodate, me. I'm going to say
Hmm.
no, that what is more important is the whole, society as one unit. And I think this plays into racial consciousness as well, that God did create distinct races of people, and that, as I can't remember what part of the Bible it says, if you do not provide for your family, you are, that's worse than an infidel, right? We have an obligation to look out for our
Family first.
families. Yes, family
Yeah.
first. Your city comes first, your state, then your nation, your race.
Yeah.
We have a people, and I believe we have an obligation to protect our people. And this does not imply at all hatred for other people.
Right.
Just like you loving your family and you putting your family first, that does not imply you hate other families, or that
Right.
you think your family is supreme, or that you should rule over other families. You just understand that you have a moral responsibility to protect them, to, secure their existence and a future for them. And so
Hmm.
I think, for
It's
instance,
like you're on a plane, fasten your own seatbelt, or not seatbelt, but like put on your own mask first, and then you're not gonna like hop 3 seats over to put the mask on some other kid before your own kid, right?
perfect, perfect, yes, right.
I I understand that.
Yeah, and so I do see how, there's so many things I can go into. I don't want to get too lost in the woods here. Just to kind of make it more fundamental, how this is a far right view in many ways is they would say, I'm an ethno nationalist. I'll
Hmm.
just say that, right? I'm a nationalist, and I believe that we should, for instance, I'm an American. You're of European descent, as far as I can tell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're white. I'm white as well. I believe that we should preserve our people as a supermajority, as the founding fathers intended. This goes back to the original cores of, our nation, that we should preserve our people, because a concern I have is our declining birth rates.
Hmm.
If you're familiar with that, we're having less kids, and we're
Yeah. Yeah.
dying
Oh yeah. Definitely.
faster. So if we do not do something about that, we will go extinct. We will die out as a people. And not only is that bad in of itself, but this will have a cascading negative effect on the rest of the world, considering the positive benefits of our people has had in the world. So
All right.
I think
So
we should. Yeah.
I do wanna sort of cut back on this a little bit. I think the distributist kind of says it well. It's my own view, that while I agree with your general, like the general sort of structuring, and I think it's because we're both idealists, that there's the self, and then there's the family, and then there's these nested, concentric circles, so to speak, of association and relationship that you have sort of a duty to first. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, yes.
While I agree with that, I don't necessarily see whiteness as a real thing. I don't know that white really means much. I'm not sure that black really means much. I think that they become somewhat confused and conflated with other things, where it's like maybe at a certain time they did mean something, but right now things are kind of mixed together. And I think that ideologically, I am more allied with certain black people than I would be with certain white people. And I think that ideology, or not even ideology, but like just shared goals and shared beliefs are much more important right now. It's not so much like color or things like that, but it's culture. That's the best way to put it. Culture is what I think is primary and interesting and important. Now you might find like there is a pattern, like there are going to be more people who are white who share a specific cultural identity with you than like an Arab or something. But I don't know that color is something to rally around. And I think it's even like right now it's dangerous, if only because it'll get you sort of roped in and associated with people that aren't necessarily good, or that certainly have no like terrible PR, if nothing else.
Yes, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah, and I don't want to have any of that land on you as well. I just know that you're a critical thinker, and you're open-minded, and you're willing to just discuss ideas rationally, and I don't want to have any sort of negative on that as well.
I have no problem with anyone like putting their opinions out there on my channel. I think that at the basis we're in agreement, and I think it's a really important discussion to be having. But I think that it's more something I'm more interested in having a shared philosophy with anyone who shares that philosophy, and looking to family first, and that would be part of that philosophy anyway, right? So like,
yeah,
if I can share a philosophy with someone, then we're on the same team, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't care what your racial background is, whether it affects your IQ positively or negatively, whether it I don't know, your biology, you have an extra muscle in your leg or something. Like, I don't care about that, right? Like, yes, biology was affected by geography and cultures rose up and fell and whatnot, but what's more important right now in the state of things, like, I'm not a very pragmatic person, but like with this, I think this is just clearly the only way to do it, is to rally around the truth of like of the ideas that we want to implement and how we want to culturally proceed before the other things, like the color thing or whatever, the race thing, that will work its way out long term. And then we'll have, ideally we'll have friendly neighbor races, and we'll just like, be friendly neighbors and cross-pollinate here and there, and it'll be fine,
Like, there's a lot to go into. I'll have to limit it for discussions and time and all that. But I mean,
sure. We can do another discussion.
Absolutely, yeah, because I don't want to have an information overload in a way.
Yeah, we're already over an hour. So
but I mean, like myself, I can go on and on. To be honest, myself, like as long as you're willing to talk, I'm willing to. But I just want to, like, for instance, like, just dive into it. When it comes to color, right? You noted how, like, oh yeah, well, these differences in color. Well, it's, if you look at these studies, how you look at the genetic differences between us. If you think there's a clear difference between a white person and a black just by looking at their color, there's actually more difference in their nervous system, right? Which is made up of the very cells that make up our brain. So if you see a clear difference there, there's even more of a difference in our brains. And if the brain is the image of our mind, you can only imagine the difference in our phenomenology. in our first person experiences of the world. We really are, black people will tell you, there's people who try to say, oh, well, I don't see color. Not implying you're saying that, but there's people who say, oh, I don't see color. We're all the same. They're failing to see the experiences that each race goes through.
Yeah.
And for instance, there is a lot of crime in the black community, primarily inflicted by fellow black people.
I think I have an explanation for that. But and I think it's more that there's still a system of slavery that's sort of culturally produced, and maybe maintained within those communities, but I don't know. I think people are tossing them crack and stuff. I don't think it's just them.
But I can't remember the name of the counties, but it's just so interesting because people will want to make certain claims like, oh, well, it's because of poverty, it's because of unemployment and things like that. But if you look at the richest black communities versus the poorest white communities, that rich black community still has more violent crime than the poor white community. And someone will maybe try to say, oh, there's a cultural thing that's still persisting. It's not just poverty and crime or things like that. It's, there's some other cultural phenomenon that still exists within those people. Yeah. But, I think that we can't ignore that culture is in some sense the flower and biology is in a sense the root. Sure. There is a sense in which, I'm a man. I'm a male. Okay. There are certain behavioral tendencies I have naturally versus a woman,
yeah.
If I'm walking down the street late at night and a woman crosses the street to avoid walking by me, I understand because, hey, there are certain behavioral traits that are prone to men across cultures, right? You can control for all sorts of factors, but the fact is men are just simply more violent than women. I'm willing to accept that because it's just the truth.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to certain types of people, for instance, like races, people will get very uncomfortable at that point. And they'll say, well, what do you mean black people are more likely to commit violence versus a white person? And the fact of the matter is, this trend just persists. It's so persistent, and it's not something I like to see. To admit, not to tell too much about myself, I do have a bachelor's in psychology. There's a lot of scientific research I've delved into, how to help people, how to best get into these behavioral patterns to really assist the best outcomes for people. And these environmental factors just seem to not be as effective. It's maybe we just need to do more research, but there's so little we can do to an extent. I'm still a man, right? I do believe we have free will and all that, but I'm always going to be a man, right? That's just the way it is. Okay, she's a woman. That's the way it is. That person's Asian. That person's Jewish. I'm white. And there are certain things that come with that. I can pretend all I want that I'm not going to get sunburned going outside without my sunscreen, but it's just, I got to do that sometimes. It's just the reality of it. So, and
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm not denying that there are these distinctions. I haven't done the work. I haven't, studies, there are a million studies. I'm not denying it. I'm not saying I'm convinced of it. But what I will say is that it doesn't seem that that's the first thing to focus on. Like, the first thing is kind of just finding people who have these similar values, and be they white or black or whatever, and working towards valuable, like things that are valuable, creating things that are good. And maybe we'll inadvertently segregate ourselves, but we definitely shouldn't forcibly do that. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm fine with that too, man. Like, I like everybody,
Ultimately, at the end of the day, what this is about for me is just preserving the existence of our people. I don't want an entire race of people going extinct, or other races as well. This is about preserving life. I believe God is life. And so I believe this is a life-affirming philosophy. At the end of the day, despite all the genetic environment arguments we can get into, it's all about preserving life for me.
But like you said, like, we could say culture is the flower of biology, but biology is the flower of the mind. So we could say, like, we look at sort of the philosophy and focus on that first. Like you were saying, that's the primitive. If we focus on the biology too much, it's
Sounds like
going to turn into
determinism,
a
right?
shit show.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like materialism,
Yeah,
right?
it
Yeah.
does. It does. Yeah.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah. It's more like you know how we are children of God, we are of God,
Yeah.
right? You know, we are. Yes, we have our minds, we have our will, we have our independence in that sense. But what energizes that is that inheritance from God and that synergy that we get from Him. And so I believe that you know, our parents and our ancestors and other things like that, there is a shared will, a shared, you know, inheritance of our consciousness and our will
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
there.
I see what you're
but,
saying.
but it's all mental though. You're right. I do ultimately put ourselves as responsible for our own actions. I don't believe we are determined by our genetics, but there is some sort of heritable component, and this could remember
And
it's a
those
consequence.
can, for good and for ill, right?
Yeah, those are actions taken by our ancestors, right? You know, some
Yeah.
people say, well, this may imply determinism, but actually, it's because of choices made by those before you,
Hmm.
right? Like, here's an uncomfortable fact, but it's just true. Those who are of mixed race tend to have way more mental illness across the board. They have more serious mental illness, they have more depression, they have more suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, more learning disabilities, and
I wonder.
there's, you
I
know,
wonder if that is strongly impacted by just the fact that they have a divided identity.
yes,
Uh,
no, that is. Yes.
okay.
And that's because of a decision made by the parents. You
Yeah.
know, because the parents made that choice to mix their identities, you know, it has resulted, you know, in this person, so, not always, of course, but I mean, when you look at mental illness by race, they are the highest. It is the number one, is two or
Mhm.
more races. And so because of that, they suffer greatly. And you can look on YouTube documentaries of, you know, like the other race, people describing what it is like to be mixed race, and they
Yeah.
describe that it makes them, you know, sad in many ways. It makes
Oh,
them
I agree.
uncomfortable, depressed, and they don't have a sense of self. And so there seems to be something about race and identity of self.
Hmm.
You know, there's something very
Yeah.
important there.
I wouldn't deny that. There's definitely a dislike of the idea of race and identity. I think that's real, but I mean, I would say as a white person, I suffered from a similar thing. Like I have this sort of blanket white thing, and then I can look back and go, oh, I had like German and I had like Irish and maybe some Italian or something, but like I don't really feel like I have any of that. I don't feel connected to a lineage at
Yeah,
all.
I'm going to get a little conspiratorial here, but I think that's partly because of I do believe there is an agenda about for globalization, and I think some of that is people trying
Yeah.
to erode our culture. And when you delve into certain subcultures on the internet, for instance, they will
But
help you realize that
whose culture?
you have a very rich European tradition that is a beautiful culture that people envy. People from all around the world are clawing to immigrate to Europe and the Anglosphere because of this great treasure. It's hard for some of us to see. I know what you're saying, right? Well, I'm just a white guy, right? If I look at my genes, I'm like, oh, I'm Italian, I'm French and German. It's just kind of a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
But when you look at the history, right? When you really look at the story of Europeans as a people, I mean, the greatest scientific achievements, the greatest explorations and inventions in art, and you know, just this history of philosophy. If you look at all the great philosophers, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not. This isn't white supremacy. Don't get me wrong. I have to
No.
say that because everyone gets sensitive. But our culture, as Europeans, we have some of the just the greatest just achievements in human history, right? I mean, it is just amazing. I mean, the first person who walked on the moon was a man of European descent. Okay, the
Yeah.
person, you know, the scientific method was a bunch of Europeans. You know, all like the internet, phones, planes, cars. You know, like just all the great pieces of art that come to mind. These are made by Europeans. Like
Yeah.
there was
So we
something
also, I
special
feel like
about our
we're also the ones who sort of set the stage for like serious problems that we're dealing with now. It's almost
people.
like
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like some people would. I'm not saying this, but like some people would say, well, yeah, like white people are basically cancer. It's like we're eating everything, you know.
They
Like
want to claim
there's the other side to that.
they want to claim that, but they will ignore. For instance, they'll blame us for slavery, right? But if you look at the Barbary slave trade,
Yeah, yeah.
African Muslims enslaved Christian Europeans in a way that was way more brutal. I can't remember if it was the number of years, number of slaves that was greater, but it was one of them, I believe. And so what happens is people will pick and choose, right? They'll blame the
Oh
white
yeah.
race. They'll blame our people for certain atrocities, but they will ignore the atrocities of other people. And, if we want to blame them collectively for something, they say that's racist. But then when they blame us collectively, all of a sudden, oh, that's not racist. Oh, I'm just woke.
Yeah,
It's like,
I'm not denying that there's a large swath of people who are intellectually dishonest and kind of pushing things.
yeah,
But
there's a lot of
I
hatred for our people. It's out there.
I hesitate to include myself in that group specifically. Like I know that I am in one sense a descendant of it, but I would say that like pretty much anyone born in the United States is a recipient of that tradition, pretty much in the same way I am. I don't know. I'm thinking kind of two ways at once right now. So
Yeah,
because I've got like the one way where I'm like, well, there's this sort of eternal mind that passes through this sieve of differentiation, and in that sense, I have this precise lineage that came from there, and I see, that's probably the way you're thinking. At the same time, though, I feel like a lot of the people, like the same way that I feel day to day, a part of that is probably the same way anybody who lives in the United States feels day to day.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is though you may not see yourself as you don't identify yourself with a certain group of people, but what's inescapable is other people will. They will
Yeah,
identify you as privileged. You're just walking around the street, you're minding your own business, you're just living your life, you're making your choices. Maybe you're doing well, but these people are coming up to you and saying, "Oh, we're gonna, you got to check your privilege, all right?" And you're like, "What?
I
I did."
no, I hear that, man. What I'm afraid of is rebounding to an extreme because they're being extreme. If we want to talk about Christianity, it's like I'd rather turn the other cheek because I'm not trying to start something really bad.
Absolutely, yes. Like I said, it's all about preserving life. It's like, do you remember the Tower of Babel? Remember that
Yeah.
story?
Oh,
Yes.
dude, I think about that shit constantly. So yeah.
Yes. There is truly nothing new under the sun. This
No.
whole global agenda that we're seeing right now with the globalists and people trying to make a one world government, this has already happened before. We
Like
already,
NeuroNet and stuff, like trying to create a Matrix world and like
yeah.
live forever, all that stuff.
So here's the thing: God saw this, right? He saw what we were doing, and him and his angels decided we're going to divide them. We're going to separate them, and we will confuse their language. Now,
Right. Right.
what happens when you're into symbology?
Yeah.
So, what does it mean to not speak the language of another person? Well, you can't really commune with them. You can't really have a culture. You can't share an identity with them. You can't even
Yeah.
speak with them, Like, you can try to communicate in other ways, but you will never have a connection to those people the way that you will with those who speak the same language as you. And that's a very
Yeah.
powerful image that God deliberately chose to put out there. He wanted us separate. He wanted us to be diverse, right? Think of the colors on a palette, right? When you're making a painting. If you
Yeah.
mix a color here or there, you can get some very beautiful colors that weren't there
Right.
before.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you mix
Mix them all
all
together,
of
you
the
could just.
colors, you've destroyed diversity, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's how I see this. I am
I'm
preserving life.
totally. I'm
That's
with you,
all
man.
about it's
That's
all about
also
life.
why I threw that cross pollination comment in there too, is because like if we ended up with these distinct tribes, is the way I'd like to look at it more than nations. These distinct sort of network of tribes that spread across the world. They would be distinct and diverse, but then there would also be this cross pollination where like they would all sort of they would network, but it would be like a gradual, slow sort of interpenetration kind of thing. Sort of like I don't know, the way I think all of reality kind of works.
That makes
But
sense.
I wanted to come back to the Tower of Babel thing though. I think the way that I interpret that is not so much that God wanted us to be different, but more that the higher you ascend the tower, the less you'll be capable of being truthful or like communicating with others. Like all right, so this is what I notice happening is these sort of echo chambers that the people are in now. What's happening is they're actually beginning to formulate their own language or their own meanings to the same word. So like to you, white means something good. To somebody in a sort of SJW loop, white means bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a simple example, but there are some where it's like the actual meaning of the word is different. So when people argue, they're arguing about something totally different, but they're using the same language. Like literally, they're both speaking English, but the English words have different meanings behind them because the meanings have shifted. And since each are in an echo chamber, they've shifted gradually, they've diverged in a way that's kind of imperceptible, but makes conversation nearly impossible. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way I interpret the Tower of Babel more. Maybe not that it can't be multiple interpretations, but
that's a very interesting way. I never thought of it like that. I think that's pretty interesting. I'll have to meditate on that a little bit. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, here's another maybe a more political implication that we may be a bit more at home with idealism that I can see you probably agreeing with. Transgenderism,
yeah.
or this whole trans idea. I think what causes some of that, was at the root of some of that, is a dualistic metaphysics, right? Because I'm a woman in a man's body, they will say, right? Or they want to transition. They want to make their phenomenology be identical to how they appear. They want to get surgery. They want to cut off their genitalia. They want to shave down their jawline and their other bones and implant boobs, whatever. These people are making a dualistic kind of mind-body distinction that I think if you weren't a monistic in a sense, if you just weren't purely monistic, that you wouldn't really be entertaining that. You would acknowledge that you're delusional. You would acknowledge that, oh, I'm suffering from dysphoria. This isn't something to take seriously. This is, well, not in the sense of like actually going through with it. You just accept it as an illness that, oh, I'm not seeing the world properly. So I think monistic idealism.
I think that it could be dualistic or it could be just purely like physicalist. And that, I guess if you're being intellectually honest, it would have to be dualism. I could see people who are self-described materialists saying that they have this dysphoria, or that they're a woman in a man's body, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right that it would have to ultimately be a dualism.
Yeah, are you familiar with, well, of course, you've seen The Matrix, right?
Oh, yeah.
Did you hear about the creators of The Matrix?
What
happened to them? Sorry, I guess it's a bit vague. The Wachowski brothers, right? The creators of The Matrix. They are now the Wachowski sisters.
No way.
Yeah, they are trans, and all throughout the Matrix. And this doesn't surprise me at all. When I found that out, I was like, I have been using The Matrix as an example of dualism forever. That it creates this skepticism.
Well, it's like a Gnosticism. The Matrix is Gnosticism, which is in a sense dualism.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, pardon me. No, you're right. That's a good insight there. Yeah, you're right. That there's this dualism there. That, oh, well, how do I know that the world is real? Notice how he doesn't question himself. There's no question of, am I real? Is Neo like, oh, do I exist? No, it's only, does the external world exist? That's very Cartesian, Descartes, dualistic. Yeah. So when you avoid that dualism, when you're just an idealist, like, how we lean towards, you don't have that skeptical problem. The world is as it appears. Notice how you appeared to be a man. You're a man, okay? These people who, oh, well, I'm actually a woman, though I appear to be a man. That's a dualism. And then we reject dualism across the board, right? Like that's a dysphoria that person must be suffering from. It's a bad metaphysic.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to think more about the idea of Gnosticism as a dualism and what that would imply, because I think ultimately Gnosticism is a sort of idealism, though. You know.
Like dualistic idealism?
Let's see. Well, all right. So Gnosticism is a very vague term. So the one that the interpretation of Gnosticism I keep in my head is that there's sort of this demiurge that has entrapped the true God in these shards, basically in a material cage, a cage of material, of matter. It does sound kind of like a dualism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I see that as a dualistic idealism.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a dualistic idealism. Yeah, that's interesting.
They see the physical world as bad.
Right.
You know, they see it's in the way of God, right?
Yeah.
And to an idealist, God is immanent. There is this, there's a really good story, like very quick. There's these two young fish swimming along, and there's this older one swimming past them who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" Mm-hmm. And the two fish just keep swimming along, and one of them looks at the other and says, "What the heck is water?" Like water is so immanent. It is so obvious and ubiquitous that they can't even distinguish water from non-water. They don't know.
I've used that same example for mine. I think it's a great one.
Yeah, I got it from oh gosh, what's his name? He gave a speech. It's called "This Is Water." Just to cite my sources. That's where I got it.
David Foster Wallace.
That's the guy. Good memory. Yeah, so that's how I see God. I think this idealist theology is a very, Jesus referred to God as, Abba, which is like, saying daddy.
Yeah.
God is not this distant, transcendent being that's just so beyond us. I mean, he is in many ways, but he's immanent.
Yeah, that's really, that's important to remember. I need to look more into like the Hebrew and the Greek translations, because I feel like there's so much that gets sort of lost. Like, because we have father, which is a very formal term,
Yeah, and in the Orthodox, this is one of the reasons I get more into the Eastern Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox. They are all about that Greek tradition, that heritage from all the way back to the Church Fathers, and yeah, it's really a very experiential theology. It engages your whole body, like icons. You use icons. You use incense.
I grew up like small O Orthodox Catholic, like Roman Catholic.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I was like an altar server. I did the incense. I did like when you come to the altar and you're holding something, you always have your hand over your heart. That, like, all those gestures and whatnot. Icons, obviously, we had all through my house growing up. So yeah, I'm totally with you. That participatory sort of way of embodying and understanding that the body, especially once I came to realize that the body was a reflection of the mind, that's when the physical gestures and whatnot really started to make more sense to me.
Yeah, right? Yeah, that's why I'm so attracted more to that very incarnate theology, right? As Jesus is in the flesh. It
makes a lot more sense, man. It's so funny. A lot of people still have this kind of Gnostic idea, like tons of Christians. I did growing up. Like, oh well, you die and you go to heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. That's
like,
right.
Well, but what is that? Like, because then they, you think about the resurrection of the body, and it's like, okay, well, one day after heaven, I guess he makes a new world or something. I don't know, but that was sort of a vague thing that wasn't talked about so much. And I'm realizing now that's central, man. Like, that's the thing. Like, the new earth, the new heaven and the new earth. That's something.
Absolutely. It's just the theological implications of, this sort of idealism are just so, it's beautiful in many ways. It's simple, and it just makes so much more sense. It's this very, more relational, more personal, like you don't have this physical world in the way. It's through creation, that you sort of commune with God all the more. Like you said, that those gestures you make in church, right? They're symbolic. And this applies to outside church as well. Like everyday life, the way we dress, the way we talk, everything is symbolic. It all means something. And it's this beautiful poem that God has made.
Personas. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, pardon me. Yeah. I was kind of wrapping up there. Yeah. But I mean, that's why I think it's just, It makes sense, you know. Like I seriously, to go back to appearance of it, like I really don't think it's a coincidence that you're low in body fat. For instance, you know, like you have an appearance about you, like you seem like a friendly guy. You know, you have a sort of like a sort of a soft appearance in your face in a way, your facial symmetry and all that. You have a sort of calm demeanor, right? Like that says something about you as a person.
Yeah, yeah, it's a story. It's an image of something that's
Yeah,
behind it, some
and
intention. Yeah.
and the real treasures of this world are people. You know, it's not these
Yeah.
money and the possessions of the world. I mean, it's right under our nose. It's the very people that we talk with and have in
Yep.
our families and our friends.
Yep.
It's
Yeah, man. I think we're really on the same page with some really like some of the deeper stuff. Because we should talk again, man. Because I definitely I yeah, I think we're on the same page with like this is something I was thinking of when you were talking about how like idealism is like this. It's the simplicity that makes it beautiful. I was thinking like the opposite of that basically would be multiplicity, and basically it's like trying to make the simplicity is beautiful because it's just there. It's just apparent. It's right there. It's
yeah.
you don't even have to grasp it. It's in your hand. You know?
Like remember the prodigal son?
Yeah.
Yeah, remember he thought he had to go out in the world, right? He thought he had to get that inheritance now, spend it, get my pleasure, get what I want out of the world, and then he realized what he really wanted was right there at
Yeah.
home the entire time. I
Well,
mean,
that's almost every story arc ever, isn't it? You have to
yeah.
leave in order to come back. I think that actually that's a man. I mean, we could go forever, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But
That's maybe that's why we're here right now as distinct personas, right?
yeah, hmm. Distinct personas or persons, or personas or persons. That's a
Like yeah, maybe as a person. I'd say persons.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But then it's like, well, the persona is the attempt of becoming a person. That's a maybe a way to think about it. Anyway, that's just a developing idea. I have like different strands of thought. I know you do too. You know, it's
Yeah,
just
we're in discussion. You know,
yeah,
yeah, this is a very ongoing. For anybody watching this here, it's an ongoing process. You know, that's how I like to see it more as just dialogues instead of just like a book that we're publishing where this is the final view. Like, no, this is still going. It's
yeah,
continuing.
yeah. What? Okay, so coming back to I'm like jackrabbiting, but
Oh,
um, it's like the alternative to idealism is the attempt to make sense of nothing. You know, um, as opposed to using nothing to come to know something or know everything. You know, it's like trying to see the mirror as opposed to the reflection and find the source of reality in that mirror and not realize that the reflection is of something that's not in the mirror.
oh, so let's just make sure. Hold on, let's just make sure I got this right. So,
Yeah.
um, maybe as a metaphor, some would say that idealism is not so much a philosophy of mind as it is a philosophy of matter, right? It's more that you're just starting with mind and saying, well, matter is just not, that's just it. It's just mind. And that's really what it's about. So maybe what you're kind of
Right.
getting at is that your ontology or knowing existence is not necessarily a matter of identifying the something, but it's identifying the nothing or maybe the negation of that nothing, right?
Well, I think it I don't know. It might be the opposite of that. Let me reframe it and see what whether this is what you're saying.
Okay.
I was thinking of the prodigal son and the way that that story arc is very common, where you have to leave home in order to return home. And when you return home, you truly know it, whereas before you'd sort of taken it for granted. So you couldn't see it in a sense. You were sort of blind to it because you were it, right? Sort of like you can't see yourself. You can only see the products of yourself, or yeah, like yeah, you can't truly see yourself. You have to see something exterior to yourself.
Oh, right.
And I think that's a property of like how I think it's how mind works. And so that's why I sort of base my ontology in there being nothing. Like the experience of nothing was actually the first experience, not the experience of the self. The experience of the self was come to in the process of observing the reflection that took place in its own negation, if that's not too sloppy of a way to say.
So yeah, it's not knowledge of, like, Descartes would start with the knowledge of the self, right? So you're saying it's more a starting of knowledge of nothing, and then knowledge of the self emerges by like maybe a distinction between the nothing and
You
you.
sort of encounter the negation which points you to yourself. And I
Okay,
think
yeah.
that that's sort of the same as like departing from home in order to appreciate home, like to actually come to know home.
Right,
So like
right.
there's a departure and a return, and I think that that's sort of the structure of reality. But if you depart and you don't return, then that would be more this like attempting to make nothing into the thing that you pursue. Like if you just continually pursue nothing and never return, I feel like that's more of a materialistic alternative, where you're trying to make the mirror be the thing itself, as opposed to just that which reflects the thing.
Okay, I think I may have something else too to kind of chime in on this here to sort of help clarify this too and see how this applies in real life as well. Um, Asceticism, right? These people will point out that what we call pleasure, a lot of the things, is not really actual pleasure. It's just the removal of pleasure or removal of a pain or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not actually something, it's a nothing, right? Like when you're hungry, you feel that discomfort in your stomach, and then you have food and now it goes away. It is
Right.
that pain, that discomfort is relieved,
Yes.
right? When you're hot and you have a cold fan or whatever to blow breeze on you, it's just a removal of that heat, and now
Right.
you are not hot anymore, right? So it's not really giving yourself something positive, it's a removal of something negative in a way. So the
Yes.
ascetic, the ones who are teaching the seekment of real pleasure, is that we should really seek the ocean instead of a drop of water, right? We should seek the source of all goodness, where there's actually something, instead of just this nothing that materialists and other people will pursue all the time. Like a lot of it's just a removal of stress. So if I have enough money, then my stress will go away. If I have, enough pleasure, then I won't be so dissatisfied with my life. And so the idealist says, no, you need to bring something positive in.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like that opens up a whole different thing that I don't really feel like getting into right now, but I like that. I like where you're going with that.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, it
Very
was kind of hopefully it helped clarify. Do I seem to be on the right page with you here a little bit?
I think you kind of took it in a different direction than I was going, but I like what you're saying, and I'm tempted to jump in with a whole different thing, but
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
fine. Yeah, yeah,
necessarily.
go ahead. Yeah. What's on your mind?
Well, it just gets into the nature of suffering and reality and the nature of mind, and how I think that the mind is the masculine and the feminine. Then, and I think that the masculine um, is this sort of ultimately sort of abundance to the point at which it requires release. See what I mean?
Yes, of course.
And that nothing is the absence, and it requires something to present itself. Like it requires something, and so the abundance necessarily like sort of takes on. There's just so many. I'm going to mix all these metaphors if I'm not careful, and it's going to be really confusing. Um, the abundance, like the mind needs to be released, basically. This is why reality exists at all, is because there's an element of mind where it cannot remain with itself, but it must sort of enter the it basically it has to enter the nothing. Like it has to enter into these concepts, and it has to continue to create these concepts, which are sort of like spaces that it can fill. See what I mean?
So, let me see here.
I think there's a certain frustration that would occur with a mind were it not for the creation of these concepts that it can inhabit, which start with nothing and then become more and more complex and become more multivariate, you know, and extend through all of time effectively.
Oh, so creation then, you know, I noticed how you said, you know, you talk about this release and then there's creation. And I'm just wondering, you know, like how humans are formed, right? We know how that happens. So what do you think is the symbolism there with creation and God, right? Is creation, you know, that part of the process for human creation, I guess, is in a sense pleasurable. But for God, I mean, is creation in a
I
way?
think that in a sense, the pleasure that God takes from creation is the pleasure of release, and the pleasure that creation takes from God is the pleasure of being filled. It's a feminine relationship from the perspective of creation.
You know what? That's right, because we're the bride of Christ.
Right.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there. See, that's important. See, you know, I'm glad you affirmed this male and female distinction. Someone might want to say, "Oh, that's dualism," or whatever. No, it's
not.
no. Yeah, yeah. Masculine and feminine. It's two sides of the same coin.
It's I mean, think about Adam and Eve and how like Adam went to sleep, and Eve, like you know, all right, you ever watch Jonathan Pajot's videos?
Wait. What's the name again?
Jonathan Pajot,
No,
Pageau. All right,
I don't think I have.
let me let's see. Type in the symbolic world.
Okay, I'll type this in right now.
I'm gonna type it in and make sure the image that I'm thinking of pops up.
Are you talking about just on Google or YouTube?
Yeah,
or?
just Google it and then yeah. All right, so it's the picture that he uses for everything. So like scroll down until you see this. Like go on his website, the Symbolic World, and scroll down and you'll see like this little circle with like it's a wheel with other circles and there's Adam and Eve at the center.
Okay, let me see here. Okay, yeah, is that
Yeah.
right?
So,
I see it there. We see Jesus in the middle there.
No,
Or
that's
Adam. That's Adam and Eve. Yeah, right.
That's Adam and Eve, and it's kind of small. It's bigger in like in his videos and whatnot, and you can look at it later if you want. But I think that's a very like that reveals the structure of creation, but it's also like in a sense it's it's like the structure of creation. It's like the masculine goes to sleep, basically. It ceases in a sense, but it ceases by giving itself to the feminine, and the feminine comes to life. So Adam went to sleep, and from his heart, basically, because rib actually apparently means heart. It's like the same kind of word. It's kind of mistranslated, or whatever. From the center of Adam, Eve rose up, which I just realized is more of that symbolism, because you've got the one, like if we're thinking in terms of binary code, you've got one, then you've got the nothing, like the zero, and then you've got the reflection on the other side, which is the one again. And it's like between these two ones, which create this boundary of like the masculine and the masculine's, the image of the masculine, you have the feminine at the center. And so it's like from the center of these two, which are actually one, at the center of the masculine, the feminine can emerge as the masculine, in a sense, dies. But like death isn't really like death. It's more of like entering into, in a sense, you know, like going to sleep. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's like the frustration is eliminated by putting itself into the feminine, which is vivified and is given life. And so by living through, sort of like, all right, you know, like flow states, you know, you can get into flow state and you're like hyper focused to the point at which you don't even like, you become the activity that you're doing.
Yes, yes.
I think that in that same way that your mind is at rest and at peace by becoming that activity outside of yourself is the same way that God is at rest within a perfect creation.
That's how I see theosis, right? In many ways, right? They will make the distinction between essence and energies, right?
Yeah.
When they say becoming one with God, you are becoming one with the energies of God. You are so in that, partaking in his actions, in that divine energy, right? That you are
Hmm.
one with it, and you are divine, but you are not in essence God.
Right.
You are never going to be the the Father, and that's it.
Right.
You're not going to be any member of the Trinity, but you are going to be one with that activity that you said. Yeah.
It's like my body is a reflection of my mind, and so in a sense it is me. But I could chop my finger off and still be me.
Yes. Yep. The whole is prior to the parts. You
Right.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man.
A lot of those philosophical problems that come up, with like the ship of Theseus or
Right.
whatever. It's because they hold the parts as prior to the whole. If you hold the whole first,
Hmm.
you don't really have that issue. It doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
So, another quick thing to bring up here. You ever heard phrases, like "get a grip," or you need to, I'm losing my grip,
Hmm.
or if someone gives a handshake and that, it's a sign of masculinity, it's a sign of
Yeah.
strength. Or oh, hey, this is a person, it says something about their character.
Yes.
I've recently been finding a ton of research showing how powerful a predictor grip strength is for mortality and all these other important aspects like cancer, heart disease, and it's just it's a very efficient, cost efficient, and quick way to do it. But it seems to be something independent of resistance training. So if you lift weights and you're really buff, that doesn't necessarily mean you have a strong grip. It's sort of an indicator of your baseline, of your base grips, of your total strength,
Huh.
and it
Yeah. See, I
predicts
was a
life
wrestler, so I
outcomes.
actually have pretty good grip. So
See, I
go
did a
on.
little bit,
You're
yeah.
you're uh, you're pumping my ego up here.
Yeah, see, that's good. See, one way to increase, the best way I've heard to increase grip strength is in youth when you're younger. Apparently, when you're older, it's
Mm.
a bit more difficult. But having that strong grip strength, there's ways you can measure it too. That will tell you a ton about someone's total muscular abilities and their overall health. And when I look at the symbolism of that more and more in life, it's like terms, these metaphors we use in everyday life seem to be more true. They seem to really be more literal and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Definitely. Yeah.
like
Wait.
when
Yeah.
you like in my everyday life as an idealist, it's so funny. When you read a comic and you see the person who's correct tends to be oh, the big strong person with the strong jaw, and then the person who's wrong is the weak person with the weird looking face, or it's like how the creator of the comic will sort of draw
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they will sort of
Like
like make their
when you
position.
like a political cartoon.
Yeah, right. And I see this happening in real life, is what's so funny. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the presidents of the United States, right, almost all of them are above 6 feet tall, right? There are these physical, you could say, quote unquote, dimensions of
Mhm.
people, right, that will sort of indicate certain things about them, right? And it's just like the world kind of looks almost like a cartoon sometimes. And like when I see the symbolism that is just abundant, it's everywhere, you know,
Yeah, man.
everything. And it's
Yeah.
just it's scientific is what's funny. As funny as it sounds, there's actually, you know, really good empirical
Yeah.
predictions you
Yeah.
can make.
That's one thing that I like. Like Jonathan Peugeot, you should check out his channel if you're into symbolism, and he's Greek Orthodox, I believe, or like definitely Orthodox.
That imagery is definitely orthodox.
Yeah, he's an icon carver,
Oh, that's
but
awesome.
he talks about symbolism a lot. It's pretty good, pretty cool stuff. And but one thing that I don't know, maybe he wouldn't agree with me, but I feel like he discounts the symbolism within scientific understanding as well. Like he draws this distinction between scientific worldview and the symbolic worldview, which is a real distinction. But then I feel like he doesn't always acknowledge, at least, the fact that within material discoveries, like scientific, like handshake strength or like anything,
Hmm.
um, even within like the structure of atoms and stuff, like you can find symbolically relevant stuff to those discoveries. It's just like a different way of seeing it, you know. But it's still present within that, I think.
Yeah, and I think, for instance, I mean, I don't know how he's going to draw all that distinction when he's talking about male and female. I mean, I mean, this is how we
Yeah.
identify.
Well, maybe it's an uncharitable interpretation on my part, but
Okay, yeah, maybe I'm being a little quick to pull the trigger as well. Now that I recall, I have seen this person's channel, and I did comment on a panpsychist video. They are a
uh,
good YouTuber there. Yeah,
yeah,
I think
definitely.
they have some interesting insights. Yeah, I think I don't know, just that symbolism. But I mean, kind of go back to male and female. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just with the Gnostic. 'Cause I know they do hold this. Do they take it as do they take male and female to be ubiquitous? I've heard some people say that everything has a male female aspect, even objects and other entities. Do you kind of see it that way as well, or?
I would say that matter is the mirror, you know, of the mind. So like everything is in the mirror, and so everything is sort of, in one sense, sort of born out of the feminine. But it also like its existence is derived from the masculine. See what I mean?
Hmm. There's like a reciprocal.
Something. Yes. There's
Yeah.
definitely like I see things as monistic, dualistic, and Trinitarian kind of simultaneously. You know, there are ways to
Yeah.
see it. I think it does reduce to like one, but it's also like the way that it is three, but then that three comes from two. You know. So
Right. Yeah. I'm a Trinitarian myself, and I really like the embrace of mystery that the Orthodox have. Like for a lot of Anglo kind of analytic philosophers, oh, this one and three, that's just incoherent. But
right,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
there's distinctions we can make to make it coherent. So
definitely,
not, or at least not contradictory, but still, it's hard to grasp, and I'm okay with that. Like
yeah.
it's a mystery to be adored rather than a problem to be solved, is how I see it.
I've definitely felt sort of called to be more open to the mystery lately myself. Um, I think trying to cram everything into one system, especially like all at once, and feel like you can be complete and done with it, is I don't know. It just turns you into a rock. You know, like you gotta stay open, and you gotta be open to the being wrong, and like to the mystery, man. Like the mystery is where beauty is, and I think the mystery is the feminine ultimately. But through the feminine, it's like the Virgin. Like she always points to her son. You know,
Yeah.
so it's like it's always this. You know, you use the mystery to discover, to discover God, I guess would be
Yeah,
the way to
it's
say it. But
a really good metaphor I've heard is imagine there's a sphere that's sort of just hovering on your table right now. You can't see it, it's invisible, right? But if you put a cloth over it, oh, you can now see like how large it is,
yeah,
right? So by concealing, you have revealed,
I dig that.
and
Yeah,
yeah, Jesus, he is God clothed in the flesh, So though he has revealed himself, he is still concealing, but he's revealing. It's a
that
very
that
yeah.
does sound a little bit Gnostic to me. The way that that's phrased, though, like he's clothed in the flesh, sounds like he just sort of took on a meat suit, as opposed to
Yeah.
like actually being he's fully man too, right?
Yes,
That's the
yes.
idea. That's why like deification, or theosis, I guess would be the word.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's why that's a real thing, right? Because he was truly God and truly man. Like
absolutely. Yeah,
so,
and so yeah, I think that's the language. I'm pretty sure it's in the New Testament where it does speak of clothed in the flesh. But
mhm.
I do think, yeah, maybe they're not necessarily holding that in a metaphysical sense of like, oh, there is a distinction of mind and matter,
Sort
but
of a
that,
poetic way of saying it, I think.
yeah, yeah. I mean, language is it's a weird example to kind of go into, but like you may have seen what the show Ancient Aliens
Yeah,
or something like that. Yeah. I don't believe in any of that stuff, but they made a good point about how, well, our ancestors, they use certain language that we just don't really have,
yeah,
we have it now to describe it, but they didn't. So it's possible they did experience some weird stuff, but
yeah.
they just simply didn't have the tools to describe it. They just didn't, like the Hebrew language is, especially ancient Hebrew, they're a high context culture. They use very little. words and communicate a lot with it. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of context. So one
Mhm.
word can mean a lot of different things, and so
Yeah.
it's
That's really beautiful to me,
yeah,
though. I like that.
yeah. So that's what I think can happen quite a bit here with the New Testament and metaphysics in general. We are limited by our linguistic tools here.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, I'll tell you what, man. We're coming up on 2 hours, and I feel like that's kind of like going over that's going to be a bit too long. So we'll
Understandable. Yeah.
probably stop here. But it's been really great talking to you, man. And we may do it again.
Yeah, likewise. It was great talking with you, dude. We'll see what goes on in the future there. Hope everyone enjoyed.
All right, let me stop recording.